Cold asphalt trembled under the weight of 170 massive engines, vibrating through the bones of an abandoned 8-year-old girl. She thought monsters had come to finish what her cruel stepmother started. Instead, those leather-clad giants became the most terrifying guardian angels this broken highway had ever seen. 8-year-old Carly Keats sat shivering in the passenger seat of a faded blue sedan, her small hands gripping the frayed edges of her seatbelt. The sky above Oildale, California, was a bruised, angry purple threatening a deluge that had been building all afternoon. Beside her sat Bayla, the woman who was legally her mother but acted as anything but. Bayla's knuckles were white as she gripped the steering wheel, her jaw set in a rigid, unforgiving line. It had been 6 months since Carly's father, Aleron Keats, had tragically passed away in a commercial trucking accident on Interstate 5. Aleron had been Carly's entire world, her fierce protector, and the only buffer between her and Bayla's thinly veiled resentment. With Aleron gone, the house had turned into a cold, silent prison. Bayla, a woman driven by status and self-preservation, had quickly realized that a grieving 8-year-old did not fit into her plans for a fresh, unencumbered start. The life insurance policy Aleron left behind was substantial, but in Bayla's twisted logic, Carly was an expensive, unwanted anchor tying her to a past she wished to erase. "Are we almost at Aunt Sarah's house?" Carly asked, her voice a timid squeak over the sound of the howling wind outside. Bayla didn't look at her. Her eyes remained locked on the desolate stretch of 2-lane highway. "Yes, Carly. We just have to make a quick stop. Be quiet until we get there." The lie hung heavy in the stifling air of the car. Carly didn't even have an Aunt Sarah, but her father's sudden death had left her mind so scrambled and desperate for familial warmth that she accepted the fabrication without question. As the first heavy drops of water began to assault the windshield, Bayla abruptly jerked the steering wheel to the right. The sedan violently bumped off the paved road and onto the cracked, weed-choked concrete of an abandoned, long-forgotten gas station. The skeletal remains of a rusted canopy loomed overhead, offering little shelter from the impending storm. The place was miles from the nearest town, surrounded by endless acres of barren scrubland. It was a ghost of a building, a place where people only stopped if they were utterly lost. Bayla threw the car into park, the engine idling with a rough sputter. She turned to Carly, her eyes devoid of any maternal warmth. "The wiper fluid is empty, and I can't see a thing in this downpour. I need you to go to the trunk, open it, and grab the blue jug. Bring it to my window." Carly hesitated, looking out at the rapidly darkening sky. The wind was whipping up dust and debris, and the temperature had plummeted. "But I don't have a jacket, Bayla. Just do it, Carly." "It will take 5 seconds, Bayla snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. Terrified of angering her stepmother further, Carly quickly unbuckled her seatbelt and pushed the heavy passenger door open. The biting cold hit her instantly, slicing through her thin cotton t-shirt and jeans. She hurried to the back of the car, her small sneakers splashing in the rapidly forming puddles. She reached out, her freezing fingers searching for the trunk release latch. Before she could even touch the metal, a terrifying sound tore through the air. The transmission slammed into drive. Carly froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Bayla," she called out, stepping back. The sedan's rear tires spun, kicking up a rooster tail of gravel and dirty water directly into Carly's face. She stumbled backward, gasping, wiping the grit from her eyes just in time to see the red glow of the taillights surging forward. "Wait!" Carly screamed, her voice tearing from her throat. "Bayla, wait! You forgot me!" She ran after the car, her tiny legs pumping as fast as they could, her lungs burning. The storm finally broke, unleashing a torrential, blinding downpour that instantly soaked her to the bone. She chased the fading red lights down the desolate highway, screaming until her voice was completely gone. But the car never slowed down. It didn't brake. It simply shrank into the distance until it was swallowed entirely by the dark, churning horizon. Carly stood in the middle of the empty road, the reality of her nightmare crashing down upon her. She was alone, truly, utterly alone. Panicked and freezing, she retreated to the abandoned gas station, seeking refuge under the rusted metal awning. She huddled against the cold, damp cinder-block wall, pulling her knees to her chest to conserve whatever little body heat she had left. The hours dragged on in agonizing slow motion. The temperature continued to drop, and the highway remained a vacant, terrifying void. No cars passed, no lights flickered in the distance. As the sun fully set, plunging the world into pitch blackness, Carly's shivering became violent. Her lips turned a pale shade of blue. The darkness brought out the frightening sounds of the desert, the howling wind, the scratching of unseen animals, the creaking of the decaying structure above her. She buried her face in her wet knees, silently sobbing, begging her father to come back and save her. She was slowly succumbing to the harsh elements, her small body shutting down as hypothermia began to take hold. She closed her eyes, the exhaustion and the freezing cold pulling her toward a dangerous, heavy sleep. Just as Carly's consciousness began to drift into a terrifyingly peaceful numbness, a strange vibration pulled her back to reality. It wasn't the wind, it was a deep, rhythmic tremor that seemed to emanate from the very earth beneath her. She opened her heavy eyelids. The sound grew louder, transforming from a distant rumble into a deafening, earth-shattering roar. It sounded like a thunderstorm had descended directly onto the highway, but the sky remained pitch black. Suddenly, a single blinding headlight pierced the darkness, cutting through the torrential sheets of water. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the desolate highway was illuminated by a seemingly endless river of brilliant white lights. Carly pressed herself harder against the cold wall, terrified. As the lights approached, the silhouettes of massive motorcycles emerged from the storm. These weren't regular riders. They rode in a tight, disciplined formation, their roaring engines echoing like a mechanized army. It was a massive convoy of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, 170 members strong, riding hard through the night. The lead rider, a hulking mountain of a man named David Big Dave Jenkins, raised a gloved hand, signaling the pack. The storm had become entirely too dangerous, the crosswinds threatening to blow their heavy Harley-Davidsons right off the road. The abandoned gas station was the only shelter for miles. One by one, the massive bikes pulled into the cracked concrete lot, their engines dropping to a low, intimidating growl before shutting off in unison. The sudden silence that followed was jarring, broken only by the relentless pounding of the storm on the rusted canopy overhead. Carly was paralyzed with fear. She had heard stories about bikers from Baylor, stories of monsters, outlaws, and dangerous men. Now she was trapped with nearly 200 of them. They dismounted, a sea of heavy, leather, rain-soaked denim and intimidating patches. Their faces were weathered, framed by thick beards and tattoos. They spoke in gruff, booming voices, cursing the weather as they sought refuge under the decaying overhang. Big Dave unfastened his helmet, shaking the water from his thick, graying beard. As he turned to scan the perimeter of their temporary shelter, his sharp eyes caught a flash of white huddled in the darkest corner of the station. He paused, narrowing his eyes. He reached into his leather vest, pulling out a heavy-duty tactical flashlight, and clicked it on. The beam of light cut through the gloom, landing squarely on the trembling, soaked figure of the 8-year-old girl. The murmuring of the bikers instantly ceased. 170 hardened men fell dead silent. "Well, I'll be damned," muttered Richard Hawk Morrison, the chapter's vice president, stepping up beside Big Dave. Carly squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the monsters to strike. But the heavy, thudding footsteps that approached her weren't aggressive. They were slow, cautious. Big Dave dropped to one knee, the wet concrete soaking through his jeans. He was a giant of a man, his presence overwhelming, but when he spoke, his voice was surprisingly gentle, a deep baritone stripped of all its usual harshness. "Hey there, little bird," Dave rumbled softly. "What in God's name are you doing out here in this mess?" Carly couldn't speak. Her teeth were chattering so violently she could barely draw a breath. Dave immediately recognized the signs of severe hypothermia. Without a second thought, he shrugged off his heavy, patch-covered leather. Cut the most sacred possession a Hell's Angel owns. Underneath, he wore a thick flannel shirt. He wrapped the heavy, warm leather jacket around Carly's tiny, freezing shoulders. It completely engulfed her, smelling of exhaust, rain, and old tobacco. But it was the warmest thing she had felt in hours. "Hawk, get the emergency kit from the chase truck," Dave barked, the command instantly snapping the other bikers into action. "Meat, grab those thermal blankets. Someone get a thermos of hot coffee now." The terrifying army of bikers suddenly transformed into a highly coordinated rescue unit. Within minutes, Carly was wrapped in 3 thermal blankets over Dave's leather cut. A tough-looking biker named Oleron Meat Campbell, whose arms were entirely covered in skull tattoos, knelt beside her with shocking tenderness, holding a steaming cup of sweet coffee to her blue lips. "Drink this, kiddo," Meat coaxed. "Small sips. It'll warm up your insides." As the hot liquid worked its way into her system, the violent shivering began to subside. She looked up at the circle of imposing men towering over her. Instead of malice, she saw genuine concern etched into their hardened faces. "Can you tell me your name, sweetheart?" Dave asked, crouching back down to eye level. Carly," she stammered. "Carly Keats." At the mention of the last name, a tall, wiry biker standing near the back of the group suddenly pushed his way forward. His name was Jackson Bones Harrison. He stared at the girl, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. "Keats?" Bones asked, his voice tight. "Did you have a dad named Artie? Artie Keats?" Drove a big rig out of Bakersfield. Carly's eyes widened, tears welling up as she heard her father's name. She nodded weakly. "Yes, but he went to heaven." Bones swore under his breath, taking a step back, his hands running over his bald head. He looked at Big Dave, his jaw clenched. "Dave, I knew Artie. He was a good man. Hauled bikes for us a few years back when we did that cross-country run. He always talked about his little girl, said she was his whole world." The atmosphere under the canopy instantly shifted. The air grew thick, electric, with a sudden collective tension. This wasn't just a random stranded child anymore. This was the daughter of a friend. She was connected. She was theirs to protect. "Carly," Dave said, his voice lowering, taking on an edge of dangerous calm. "How did you get out here? Where is your family?" The kindness of these terrifying strangers broke the last of Carly's emotional dams. The tears flowed freely, mixing with the rain on her face. Between heavy sobs, she poured out the whole horrific truth. She told them about Baylor, the fake trip to Aunt Sarah's, the lie about the wiper fluid, and the taillights disappearing into the storm. As she spoke, a chilling silence fell over the 170 Hell's Angels. It wasn't the silence of shock. It was the deafening silence of a storm brewing, of a collective, righteous fury igniting simultaneously in the hearts of extremely dangerous men. Eyes hardened, jaws locked tight. Hands instinctively curled into fists. No one abandoned a child in the freezing rain to die. And absolutely no one did it to the child of a man who was respected by the Hell's Angels. Big Dave slowly stood up. He didn't yell or scream. He didn't have to. He looked around at his brothers, making eye contact with the chapter officers. The message passed between them silently, an unspoken vow sealed in the cold night air. Bayla Keats thought she had discarded her problem in the middle of nowhere. She had no idea she had just made an enemy of the most formidable brotherhood on wheels, and that 170 Hell's Angels were about to bring hell straight to her doorstep. The storm outside raged on, but inside the customized chase truck trailing behind the massive convoy, Carly was finally warm. Wrapped in heavy thermal blankets and Big Dave's colossal leather vest, she lay across the wide back seat, the steady hum of the truck's tires lulling her into a deep, exhausted sleep. The driver, a broad-shouldered prospect named Tommy, kept his eyes glued to the taillights of the pack, fiercely guarding the precious cargo he had been trusted to transport. When Carly finally opened her eyes, the harsh, terrifying world of the abandoned gas station was gone. She was lying on a plush leather sofa in a room bathed in warm amber light. The walls were lined with wood paneling, framed photographs of motorcycles, and a massive billiards table. This was the heavily fortified local clubhouse of the Hells Angels, a place few outsiders ever saw, let alone an 8-year-old girl. "Morning, sweetheart," a gentle voice spoke. Carly sat up, pulling the blankets tighter. A woman with kind, crinkling eyes and silver hair pulled into a tight bun was sitting in an armchair nearby, knitting. This was Clara, Jackson Bones Harrison's wife of 30 years, a woman who commanded as much respect in this building as any patched member. "I made you some pancakes," Clara said, nodding toward a plate stacked high with syrupy food on the coffee table. "You gave my husband and his brothers quite a scare last night. But you are safe now. Nobody's ever going to hurt you again." While Carly ate, a far different scene was unfolding behind the heavy oak doors of the clubhouse's private meeting room. 170 men, still smelling of damp leather and highway grit, stood shoulder to shoulder in the cavernous room. At the head of the heavy wooden table stood Big Dave. Beside him was Hawk, the vice president, and Bones, whose face was a mask of cold, calculated fury. "We have a situation," Big Dave's voice boomed, silencing the room instantly. "A little girl, the daughter of Artie Keats, a man who ran straight for us and never asked for a dime, was dumped on Highway 99 like garbage, left to freeze to death by her stepmother, a woman named Bayla." An angry, low growl rumbled through the crowd. Men gripped the backs of chairs, knuckles turned white. "We are the Hells Angels," Dave continued, his eyes scanning the room, making contact with every man. "We don't rely on the system when the system doesn't know a crime has been committed. We find this woman. We find out where she is going, who she is with, and what she is planning. Hawk, get the network running. I want eyes on every motel, every gas station, every toll booth between here and the border." The Hells Angels operated an intelligence network that rivaled some government agencies. They had members, associates, and sympathizers embedded in every layer of blue-collar society. Mechanics, tow truck drivers, bartenders, and night-shift motel clerks. They were all part of the club's extended eyes and ears. Within 2 hours, the network yielded its first massive, terrifying twist. Hawk burst back into the meeting room, slamming a yellow legal pad onto the table. "Dave, you need to see this. I had Jimmy over at the DNV run the plates Carly gave us, and I cross-referenced it with my contact at Pacific Coast Insurance." Bones leaned over the table. "What did you find?" "Bayla didn't just dump the kid because she didn't want to be a mother," Hawk said, his voice dropping to a grim, dangerous register. "Artie's life insurance policy paid out 2 days ago. $1.5 million. But that's not the worst part." The room was dead silent, waiting. I had one of our boys at the commercial truck yard pull the maintenance records for Artie's rig. The crash report said his brakes failed on the Grapevine Pass, Hawk explained, pointing to his notes. But the mechanic who signed off on the rig's inspection 3 hours before Artie's crash, his name is Garrett Miller. And guess who Garrett Miller has been quietly renting a townhouse with for the past 6 months? "Bayla," Bones whispered, the horrifying truth dawning on him. "Exactly. Hawk confirmed. Artie's death wasn't an accident. Baylor and this mechanic rigged the truck. They murdered him for the insurance money. And Carly was the only legal heir left who could contest the payout or draw suspicion. With Carly out of the picture, frozen to death on the highway, Baylor and Garrett walk away with $1.5 million and a clean slate. Big Dave's face turned to stone. The abandonment was no longer just child cruelty. It was the final loose end of a calculated, cold-blooded murder of a friend. "Where are they?" Dave asked, his voice deadly quiet. "T-Bone just called in from Bakersfield," Hawk replied, checking his phone. He spotted the faded blue sedan parked outside the Starlight Motel on Route 58. They've got a U-Haul trailer hitched to Garrett's pickup. They're packing up. Looks like they're making a run for the Mexican border. Big Dave reached for his heavy leather cut, sliding his arms into the sleeves. He adjusted his collar, his eyes burning with an intense, terrifying light. "Mount up," Dave ordered. The Starlight Motel was a run-down, neon-lit relic from the 1970s, isolated on a dusty stretch of Route 58. Baylor Keats stood by the open tailgate of Garrett's pickup truck, tossing a heavy leather duffel bag into the bed. She wore designer sunglasses and a triumphant smirk, feeling the cool, crisp morning air against her face. Garrett, a greasy, nervous man with restless eyes, slammed the tailgate shut. "You sure the kid won't find her way to a phone?" he asked, looking over his shoulder for the 100th time. Baylor laughed, a sharp, callous sound. "Out there? In that storm last night, please." It was 20 degrees with a wind chill. "She's long gone, Garrett. Stop worrying. By the time anyone even thinks to look for Aileron's brat, we'll be sipping margaritas in Cabo, completely untraceable." Garrett managed a weak smile, reaching into his pocket for the keys. "Yeah, you're right. We did it. We actually pulled it off." "Of course we did," Baylor said, stepping toward the passenger door. "Now let's get out of this dump." Before Garrett could insert the key into the lock, the ground began to vibrate. It started as a low, distant hum, rattling the loose gravel in the motel parking lot. Baylor paused, her hand on the door handle frowning. The vibration quickly escalated into a thunderous, overwhelming roar that seemed to swallow the entire world. The cheap plastic neon sign of the motel rattled violently against its metal frame. "What the hell is that?" Garrett yelled over the deafening noise. Suddenly they poured into the parking lot. A river of chrome, black leather, and roaring V-twin engines. 10 bikes, 50 bikes, 100 bikes, 170 massive Harley-Davidsons flooded the small motel lot, moving with terrifying military precision. They completely blocked the exit to the highway. They surrounded the pickup truck, the blue sedan, and the motel room doors. They parked wheel to wheel, creating an impenetrable circular fortress of heavy machinery around Baylor and Garrett. The engines cut out one by one until the only sound was the popping of cooling exhaust pipes and the terrified, ragged breathing of the two murderers in the center of the ring. Baylor's sunglasses slid down her nose, the color completely drained from her face. She was entirely surrounded by massive, hardened men wearing the infamous winged death's head patch of the Hells Angels. They didn't shout. They didn't brandish weapons. They just stood by their bikes, crossing their thick arms, staring at her in absolute terrifying silence. The crowd parted slowly and Big Dave stepped forward. He was flanked by Bones and Hawk. Dave's boots crunched loudly on the gravel as he walked right up to the front bumper of Garrett's truck. Garrett backed away, his hands raised in a panic. "Look, man, whatever you want, take it. The truck, the money, take whatever." Dave ignored him. He kept his eyes locked dead on Baylor. "Hello, Baylor," Dave said, his voice low but carrying clearly in the tense silence. "You forgot something on the highway last night." Baylor's knees buckled slightly. She grabbed the side of the truck to keep from collapsing. I don't know what you're talking about. Who are you people? Bones stepped forward, pointing a massive calloused finger directly at her face. Artie Keats was our friend, Bones snarled, his voice vibrating with barely contained rage. And his daughter is under our protection. Baylor let out a pathetic, high-pitched whimper. She ran away. I tried to find her. Save it, Hawk interrupted, tossing a thick manila folder onto the hood of the pickup truck. It landed with a heavy smack. We know everything. We know about the brake lines on Artie's rig. We know about the $1.5 million payout. We have the mechanic's lobs you falsified, Garrett. Garrett spun around, staring at Baylor with wide, betrayed eyes. You said nobody would ever look into the truck. You said the cops ruled it an accident. The cops did, Big Dave said softly, but we aren't the cops. Dave took another step closer, looming over Baylor like a mountain. The sheer psychological terror radiating from the 170 men surrounding her was suffocating. Baylor fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably in the dirt. Please, she begged, clasping her hands together. Please don't kill us. I'll give you the money. All of it. Just let us go. Big Dave looked down at her with absolute disgust. We don't want your blood money, and we aren't going to touch you. We don't have to. In the distance, the wail of police sirens pierced the morning air. The sound grew louder, rapidly approaching the motel. The Hells Angels had already orchestrated the end game. Hawk had anonymously couriered the entire folder of undeniable, irrefutable evidence, including the falsified mechanic logs, the insurance transfers, and Carly's statement to Detective Lawson, a tough but fair local investigator who had been deeply suspicious of Alaron's crash from the beginning. 3 police cruisers and an unmarked detective's car swerved into the parking lot, their red and blue lights flashing frantically. As the police officers stepped out, hands hovering near their holsters, they stopped dead in their tracks, shocked by the sight of the massive biker club holding the perimeter. Detective Lawson stepped out of the unmarked car. He looked at Big Dave, then down at the weeping, broken couple on the ground. "We're just passing through, Detective," Big Dave said calmly, stepping back from the truck. "We stopped to stretch our legs. It seems these 2 citizens are very eager to confess to some serious crimes. I suggest you read them their rights." Lawson looked at the manila folder on the hood of the truck, then back at Dave. A silent look of understanding passed between the 2 men. Lawson nodded, signaling his officers. "Baylor Keats, Garrett Miller, you are under arrest for the murder of Alaron Keats, insurance fraud, and the attempted murder and abandonment of a minor," Lawson recited as the handcuffs clicked shut over Baylor's wrists. Baylor looked back at Big Dave as she was shoved into the back of the police cruiser. The last thing she saw before the door slammed shut was the impenetrable wall of leather-clad giants, standing as unmovable sentinels of justice. 6 months later, the morning air in Oildale was crisp and clear. Carly stood on the front porch of a beautiful, modest house in the suburb. She wore a bright yellow backpack and a brand-new denim jacket. Clara stood behind her, adjusting the collar of the girl's coat. Following the arrests, Bones and Clara had petitioned the state for permanent custody of Carly. Given the overwhelming circumstances and Alaron's prior association with Bones, the judge had expedited the adoption. Carly finally had a real family, one that loved her unconditionally. "Are you ready for your first day at the new school, sweetie?" Clara asked, smoothing Carly's hair. "Yes, Aunt Clara." Carly smiled, her eyes bright and full of life. A familiar, deep rumble echoed down the suburban street. Carly's smile widened into a massive grin. Around the corner rode Big Dave, Bones, Hawk, and a dozen other members of the chapter. They pulled up to the curb, their heavy bikes gleaming in the morning sun. Big Dave kicked his kickstand down and walked up the driveway, a massive, warm smile breaking through his thick beard. "Morning, little bird," Dave said. handing her a custom-made miniature leather vest with a special patch that read, "Protected by the Hamsi." "You ready to ride?" "Ready, Uncle Dave," Carly beamed, slitting the vest over her shoulders. Bones lifted his new daughter onto the back of his customized Harley, securing a helmet over her head. As the convoy of bikers escorted the 8-year-old girl down the street toward her elementary school, the neighborhood watched in awe. Carly Keats had lost her father and faced the absolute darkest side of human greed, but she had gained something extraordinary in return. She had an army behind her, and she would never ever walk alone again. If Carly's incredible journey and the fierce protection of these unexpected guardian angels touched your heart, please like this video and share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another thrilling real-life story of justice and redemption. Leave a comment below telling us what you thought of the bikers' revenge. Thank you for watching.